Hello everyone, welcome to This Week in Parliament, where we aim to inform the public of the current debate happening in the House of Commons. The theme of this week is Justice System Reform. 4 of the 10 bills discussed this week fall into this theme. Starting off this week, Member of Parliament engaged in the second reading of Bill C-273. The bill was sponsored by the NDP member representing New Westminster Burnaby. It aims to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code. This means the legislation would criminalize the usage of physical force by parents and teachers for child discipline. The current criminal code allows parents to use light physical punishment such as spanking, and it allows teachers to physically remove the child out of the classroom if their behavior disrupts the class. In their speech, the NDP had made it clear that the bill had received endorsement from multiple organizations on human rights and child development. The bill was also supported by the Liberal Party, which argued that other developed countries had taken similar action. On the other end of the spectrum, the Conservatives opposed the bill and criticized how it would be an overreaching of federal jurisdiction, and government should not interfere too much in the way parents decide to educate their child. Members of the Bloc Québécois also opposed the bill and expressed their concern about how this legislation would make it harder for teachers to do their jobs. The Conservatives also tabled a private member bill to amend the criminal justice system. Bill C-351 required violent offenders who had committed more than one count of first-degree murder and considered to be dangerous to be imprisoned in a maximum security facility. This legislation was a response to the Paul Bernardo scandal that happened during the summer, during which the notorious serial murderer who was caught in 1993 and had been serving his life sentence was allowed to be transferred to a medium security facility. The Conservatives argued that this bill would ensure justice and help the grieving family recover. Detractors of the bill in the bloc criticized that this legislation violates the rights of prisoners. The Democrat and Liberal expressed their concern that the bill would harm Indigenous and Black Canadians who are over-incarcerated. The Liberal and Bloc state that this bill would reduce the ability for prisoners to be rehabilitated because maximum security facilities lack these services. And they emphasize that the chance to be transferred to a lower security prison serves as an incentive for the prisoner to be less violent and adopt better behavior. Another criminal justice bill that is far less controversial is Bill C-48. The legislation had passed the House in September and had returned from the Senate with a few amendments. The bill aims to reform the bail system by shifting the burden of proof to the accused. To be specific, felons that had a criminal history including usage of guns and other dangerous weapons are required to prove that they are trustworthy enough to be released for bail and will appear before court for their trial. The Senate recommended that the bill expand the definition of dangerous weapons to include explosive devices, crossbows, and others. Soon the bill will be voted in the House and sent to the Governor General for royal assent. Following this theme of criminal justice, the Conservative member representing Thornhill also tabled Bill C-353, titled the Foreign Hostage Taker Accountability Act. The legislation aimed to promote intergovernmental communication during a hostage crisis, offer guidance to family of the victim, and provide financial reward to those who can provide critical information that would lead to the release of the hostage. In addition, the legislation will reform the Terrorist Funding Act and make it stricter for the organization to launder money through Canada. The bill was initially sponsored in September, but the Conservatives had used the recent hostage crisis following the October 6 Hamas attack on Israel to stress the necessity of this bill. All other parties are willing to engage in further discussion and have the bill enter committees for further study, but there was multiple concerns. The Liberal and Bloc questioned the usage of financial incentive because this could increase the amount of false information provided by opportunistic individuals, includes those associated with the capital group. The NDP also expressed their concern that the change to the Terrorist Funding Act is too vague and can affect money being donated to charitable organizations. In addition, the NDP recommend that the bill should do more to support the family of the victims. Moving away from the theme of criminal justice, the House also discussed Bill C-322 that aimed to establish a framework for a national school food program. This framework would require the government to work with partner industry, the indigenous community, and territorial and provincial governments to create programs that provide food to students. These programs should take into account the circumstance of a location, cultural diversity, and it should promote the usage of local and sustainable food systems. The bill received support from the Liberal and NDP, which stressed the importance of nutrition in academic success. During the debate, the Conservative Party criticized the Liberal government over their spending policy that had created the inflation which made it harder for families to provide to their children. The Bloc Québécois opposed this legislation and criticized that this would be an overreach of the federal jurisdiction. Members of the Bloc Québécois also tabled a private member bill, Bill C-354, required the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commission to consult with Quebec and other provincial governments before enacting policy that would affect the cultural distinctiveness of Quebec and other francophone community. All parties are open for the bill to enter committee for further discussion. The Conservative Party hope that certain aspects of the legislation will be clarified. The NDP think that the bill should cover the French-speaking community outside of Quebec, and the Liberal Party worried that the involvement of provincial government might harm the independence of the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commissions. Beside these new discussions, the House also visited business discussed in the past week, Bill C-275, that aims to penalize those who break into husbandry facility, had exited the committee, and with overwhelming support, the House had voted to pass the bill, and it will move on to Senate. Bill C-58 also was discussed during this week's session, but little progress was made. The House also revisited Bill C-234. The legislation offered farmer exemption from the carbon tax on emission generated from their farming activities. The bill was tabled by the Conservative Party with the aim to reduce the cost of farm operation, which will lower the food prices. The bill had passed the House in March, but the Senate had refused to endorse the legislation. The Conservative Party accused the Liberal of using their senators to block this bill, and the motion being discussed is to ask the Senate to pass the bill. The discussion devolved into a fight between the two parties over the recent scandal that the Conservative MP and Senator had been bullying senators who vote against the bill, which had led to the harassment and death threat to those who voted against the bill. The Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Liberal Party accused the Conservative of being hypocritical because they are the only party that still caucuses with their senator weekly, and in the past they had used this same tactic to block other bills. The Bloc Québécois and the NDP discussed the legitimacy of the Senate and proposed that the upper house should be reformed or abolished. By the end of the discussion, a vote was called, and the motion failed to pass with the support of the Conservative and NDP, but the Bloc Québécois and Liberal vote against the motion. The House was also scheduled to debate the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement and Bill S-9, which aimed to amend the Chemical Weapon Convention Implementation Act. The Conservative Party blocked the discussion over these two bills by using concurrent reports to discuss the 2020 report on food insecurity. This action was criticized by the Liberal and NDP. They then accused the Conservatives of betraying the Ukrainian people because the Canada-Ukraine Congress had explicitly stated support for the free trade agreement, and the amendment to the Chemical Weapon Convention would be damaging to Russia. It had been an intense week on the Hill, and hopefully cooler heads prevail and the House of Commons can return to engage in more productive discussion next week. That's all for this week, folks, and thank you so much for listening and for your support, and please subscribe to be notified of our weekly summary.